Hi, I'm Caden, here with my brother,
Cal,
and you're watching Eating W's.
eat the W.
That's a W. Let's eat one. Let's eat one. That's a W.
On today's episode of Eating W's, we have our NFL Week 14 recap. But before we jump into those slated games, we're going to talk about a few pieces of news, starting off with a very sad injury in Arizona. Kyler Murray is now out for the season with an ACL tear. So a team that already has had to deal with a bunch of various different injuries to big-time players, role players, everything across the board. They've already had to deal with so many injuries. Now officially lose their quarterback for the rest of the season. So tough one there.
Yeah, it's tough. And they do have a decent backup with Colt McCoy, but I just don't know if he's good enough to lead them to a playoff run.
Yeah, they're already starting a pretty bad situation. So it would take a more than a miracle to have Colt McCoy turn it around and get them anywhere near the playoffs. Next up, a couple of cool veteran signings, starting with the Cowboys signing veteran wide receiver T.Y. Hilton, and then Cole Beasley coming out of retirement and technically re-signing with the Buffalo Bills. So two teams pick up a couple of veteran pieces there for the wide receiver corps.
Yeah, and I know the Cowboys were kind of expected to sign Odell Beckham, but they went with T.Y. Hilton instead, who's a little more healthy than Beckham.
Yep, and then moving on to the games now, starting with the Thursday night game of the Las Vegas Raiders heading to Los Angeles to take on the Rams, and the Rams winning by a score of 17-16 off of a miraculous Baker Mayfield game-winning drive. Baker came in, and after only being in LA for 2, 3, maybe 4 days,
I think
if
3
even.
days.
Yeah, 3 days. Comes in and he didn't start, but he not only comes into the game early, but he comes into the game early, plays pretty decent, and actually ends up winning the games and effectively wiping the Raiders out from playoff chances.
Yeah, the poor Raiders, they just can't catch a break. They had a tough loss to Jeff Saturday in his first game, and now they have this tough loss to the Rams against Baker Mayfield, who, like you said, just came in a few days earlier and was able to upset the Raiders.
Absolutely insane. The just winner in Baker Mayfield. We talk about it with Justin Fields a lot, but Baker Mayfield kind of has that too, and has been in a very similar situation as Justin Fields, never really having those weapons, but always just having that heart and playing with 100% every single down. And as you see, a lot of the time, just that sheer effort does pay off for players. So good for Baker. I love to see it. Moving on to the Sunday slated game, starting with a near huge upset. The Houston Texans went to the Cowboys and just barely lost in Dallas, with the Cowboys picking up 27 points and the Houston Texans only getting 23.
Yeah, this was a lot closer game than people thought. That was a strong running game from the Cowboys that was able to keep them alive, and Houston just never gave up the fight. They continued to battle back no matter what. They had a lead late into the game and just was not able to put it away.
Yep. 3 different quarterbacks had a pass attempt for the Texans. Kyle Allen started and had an attempt. Davis Mills got an attempt, and Jeff Driscoll, correct. I totally blanked on his name at the end there, but Jeff Driscoll also had a few pass attempts and a few very successful runs for Driscoll, which was kind of random to see the Texans just out of nowhere go into this read option type offense. But nevertheless, 3 different quarterbacks came in, and even the 3 combined couldn't quite take out Dallas.
Not quite.
Man, it was close. Dallas had a huge goal line stop late in the game, which led to them driving down the field and picking up the lead. And then even with only seconds left on the clock, the Texans still almost put up an effort and even actually had a chance at a Hail Mary from about the 50-yard line, which did make it to the end zone, but you could really see that skill gap on that Hail Mary play, especially because if you watch it, Dallas defenders had like 6 people tracking the ball. And if you watch, there was maybe 1 Houston receiver that even knew where the ball was landing, which just went to show how crazy it is that this game was even close, let alone the Texans actually had a real chance to win late. But nevertheless, Cowboys pick up the win. Moving on to a game that I sadly had to sit through all of, the Minnesota Vikings went to Detroit to take on the Lions and fell by a score of 23-34. Now, the main headline of this game that makes you think, what? How did they lose? Is that the Vikings put up over 450 yards of total offense. which isn't really that unregular against the Lions defense to put up that many yards. But usually when teams put up that many yards against the Lions defense, they're also putting up 30, 40 plus points. The Vikings only put up 23 points off of 450 yards, which is just horrid. But I really think that this was the Lions playing well more than the Vikings playing overly bad. We, of course, allowed a lot of yards and a lot of points on defense ourselves, but the Lions have been able to do that against a lot of pretty good defenses in the league. We were absolutely beat to hell in the defensive secondary. Our offensive line was also pretty beat up, hence why Kirk Cousins, I want to say, had 3 or 4, maybe even 5 sacks on him throughout the game. But this was such a tough one to sit through because it's hard to explain because I've never at the same time felt like the Vikings should be in a game and out of a game so much in a close game like this. There were some factors when I was like, I wish this game would just end. I don't even know how we're close. Like, it just needs to be over. And then there was some factors where I was like, we should be winning this game. So it was a weird kind of middle of the pack thing there, but it was a tough one overall.
Yeah, it was a good win by the Lions. They really took it to the Vikings early on with an early touchdown to Jameson Williams, who had his first career touchdown and first career catch at the same time. And then the big thing for me was that the Vikings were missing Harrison Smith on defense. And he's that defensive leader, defensive captain. And when you're missing him, that makes quite a difference and puts a huge hole in the defense.
Yeah, it was crazy to see the difference with Harrison Smith versus without Harrison Smith in that secondary. And I agree. I think that was probably the key to the loss. I think we win that game if Harrison Smith is in that secondary. Next up, we had a surprisingly close one again with the Kansas City Chiefs heading to Denver to take on the Denver Broncos and only winning by a score of 34-28. So again, just like the Texans-Cowboys won, the overdog, the predicted winner, still did win, but it was much closer than anyone would have guessed, and it was especially surprising considering Russell Wilson, the Broncos starting quarterback, didn't even play for most of the third quarter and all of the fourth quarter, and the Broncos were still almost able to pick up this divisional win. I mean, the Chiefs didn't look that good. They really showed some cracks in the armor, which they have done multiple times this season, and especially against divisional opponents. But overall, Mahomes had 3 interceptions. Granted, that also was paired with 3 touchdowns and over 300 yards from Mahomes. But still, that's a really good Broncos secondary. So when you give up 3 turnovers, you see why it becomes a much closer game.
And the Chiefs actually started out 27-0, and the Broncos were able to come back and make it a game. And like you said, Russell Wilson got a concussion early in the third quarter. He had a big knot on his head, they showed. I don't know if you saw that or not, but he had like a big bump on his head here, and you could tell that it was bad. And once you saw that, you knew he was going to be out for the game. But Brett Rippon was able to come in and throw a touchdown and keep it within the 1-possession game. It was just too much for the Chiefs to handle, or too much for the Broncos to handle and come back, though, for the Chiefs to get their 14th straight win against the Broncos.
The Broncos did have a chance on a drive late, but they were not able to convert on offense and pick up the score. Next up, we have an upset that actually went through and ended up happening. We have the Carolina Panthers, who went to Seattle to take on the Seahawks and picked up the road win by a score of 30-24. Now, the Panthers, of course, had Sam Darnold starting at quarterback, and then the running back duo of Dante Foreman and Chuba Hubbard, 2 guys who really overperformed this game and both put up stellar performances, with Dante Foreman putting up just under 100 yards and Chuba Hubbard putting up about 70 yards and a touchdown. So you can see why it happened, but the real shocker here was I don't even think the Panthers played overly great. I think the Seahawks just really played down to the Panthers level. Geno Smith had 2 big-time interceptions when they were driving. Again, just like Mahomes, he paired that with 2 touchdowns of his own. But when you see those extended turnovers like that, the Seahawks were missing both of their starting running backs right now, and both Kenneth Walker and DJ Dallas were out. So they had rookies at running back there in Seattle. So I guess it kind of makes sense when you see an upset like this, but overall, when you're like the Seahawks and you're fighting for a playoff chance in the situation they are right now where they are overly control of their own destiny, you can't let injuries affect you against a worser team like this. And overall, a good win by the Panthers.
Yeah, and it was another surprising win because it was in Seattle, which is a very tough place to play. And Carolina was able to rack up over 200 yards rushing total. And that was the key difference there, is that they were able to keep it on the ground, keep that clock moving, and they were able to score touchdowns off of it, with their third string running back scoring a late touchdown, Ross Blackshear, to put the game away. So all in all, a good win by the Panthers. It was a tough fight, and it was a very entertaining game. But it was just too much for the Seahawks to overcome, and it was really helpful for the Packers because the Seahawks fell to the 7th seed or to the 8th seed and knocked them out of the playoffs, which puts the Packers into the 8th seed.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
3 touchdown drive by the Panthers, all 3 drives, 10 or more plays. So to complement that running game, like Callum mentioned, huge one there for the Panthers. And then finally, the last game we're going to talk about is the Sunday night game of the Miami Dolphins heading to Los Angeles to take on the Chargers. And the Chargers finally pick up that statement win by a score of 23-17. I've been kind of on the Chargers bandwagon all year. They have been absolutely shredded by injuries, and I know they haven't been playing up to their full potential. So it was nice to finally actually see them play pretty damn close to that full potential against a Miami team who's been having a really solid season. And they just finally actually had everybody, and you could tell when you have Herbert, Austin Eckler, Keenan Allen, Josh Palmer, all of those guys on the field at once, it makes such a huge difference. Their defense stepped up and continue to play well, even though they actually experienced some injuries on the defensive side for Los Angeles, missing a few corners. But Asante Samuel Jr. has continued to be a really underappreciated corner in that system, I would say. I think he deserves a lot more praise than he has been getting. The Chargers pick up a win that really shakes up the AFC playoff race.
Yeah, it was really a bad game by the Dolphins. Tua started out 3 for 10, had an interception. It was really a bad game for Tua. He never really did get on track and get going. And it really makes a difference when you have your full complement of weapons for the Chargers, who finally got Mike Williams back for the first time in, I think, 6 weeks. And the first time that Mike Williams and Keenan Allen have played together all season, or completed a game for the first time all season. They had played together, but they were not able to finish games together. So this was the first time they were able to finish a game together, and I think this will really turn around the Chargers.
I knew I was missing one person when I was naming off the players on offense. Mike Williams also played, yes. So yeah, like I said earlier, I've really been on the Chargers bandwagon all year, and I think they are a playoff team. So we'll see if they can continue this success. But that was our NFL Week 14 recap. Keep an eye out tomorrow when we have our NFL Week 15 predictions. But until then, don't forget
To eat the W.